You're listening to Soundside. I'm Libby Denkman. On the campaign trail, President Trump was quite clear about his plans for deportations. And we've seen since he's retaken office that those plans weren't just empty promises. There have been headlines after headlines about how his enforcement actions are shaking norms and lives. We felt the impacts in this region. The Seattle Times reports that just yesterday, ICE officers arrested at least 3 people at a Seattle immigration court. Also on Tuesday, federal immigration agents arrested 17 people at a factory in Kent. A green card holder from the Philippines has been held by Customs and Border Protection at SeaTac Airport since May 15th, when he returned with his wife and daughter from a vacation. Maximo Londonio is married to a U.S. citizen, and his family says he's been in the U.S. since the age of 12. While actual numbers of deportations may not match President Trump's campaign pledges, the administration has ramped up the aggressiveness of enforcement, going after students on visas and green card holders and invoking an 18th century law to speed deportations of accused gang members. But if you are approached by ICE, no matter your legal status, by law, everyone is entitled to certain rights and protections. And in case you could use help knowing what those are, we have Henry Huang here with us. He is one of the directing attorneys for Northwest Immigrant Rights Project. Henry, thank you for being here. Really appreciate your time today.
Happy to be here, Libby.
So what are the most common ICE activities that you're hearing about in the Pacific Northwest right now, and where has that activity generally been happening?
Yeah, I think that most activity probably happens around the border areas. You don't hear about this as much, but there's a lot of people that are coming into this country or just happen to be in the border areas that are being detained by CBP, Customs and Border Protection. But what we're also seeing, of course, is the interior enforcement. We're seeing a lot of arrests that are happening, particularly in Eastern Washington, where you're seeing some of these highly publicized sort of arrests that are happening either at workplaces or in people's homes. And unfortunately, we're seeing an uptick in these large-scale raids that are happening at places of employment as well.
Like what happened at the roofing company in the Bellingham area. We've talked about the president's promises and kind of the political valence of this. Do we see a major change from Biden to Trump in the types of people being targeted and the types of people who are concerned about their immigration status right now?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that the Biden administration, by and large, was targeting folks with criminal histories and that had some sort of contact with law enforcement. And despite Trump's rhetoric about really trying to go after, alleged criminals, they're just casting a wide net. They're sort of trying to capture anyone who just happens to not be a citizen, frankly. As you mentioned before, there have been some people with green cards who've traveled with no problem whatsoever for many years now, including under the Biden administration. And it's only now that they're suddenly being detained at CBP and transferred over to Tacoma for long-term detention.
We want to get to specific advice here, and you can only give general guidance, of course. Every situation is different, so these are broad brushes we're going to be painting with. But let's start with a common scenario. People getting arrested at a regularly scheduled check-in with an immigration official. If you are a person with one of these appointments coming up, what should you do?
Yeah, that's a great question because that's a very common scenario where people are arrested, are at these check-ins where people have agreed to come in and they're not a flight risk. They're at regularly scheduled appointments that happen maybe once a year, maybe they happen every couple of months. And if you think that you are at all at risk of being detained, and here I would be speaking to people that maybe have had some contact with law enforcement or have been ordered removed by an immigration judge. I would urge any of those people to talk to an immigration lawyer before you go to understand the risks, understand what you might need to plan for in the case that you are detained at that check-in.
This may seem very specific, but is there anything that you should hold on your person, like any specific extra documentation or phone numbers that you should be taking into any kind of interaction with immigration authorities right now?
Yeah, I mean, I'll go back to what you had mentioned, which was very smart, that there are no sort of bright line rules. There's no like advice that I can give across the board, but certainly there are certain documents that depend on your specific situation. So this is all the more reason to visit an immigration attorney, to talk to someone with experience, because there are absolutely some documents that you can carry that will help protect you. An easy example I think that I can give is that if you are in fact a green card holder, a lawful permanent resident, and you've really never had any contact with police and you've never left this country for any long periods of time, by and large, absolutely you should carry that green card with you at all times.
Another scenario involves you're out driving and you are pulled over by immigration officials, by ICE. Do you have the right, for example, to not roll down the window if you have an ICE officer at your car window?
You do, but you risk them breaking the window, right? I mean, we've seen this a lot now where there's very dramatic video where people are trying to communicate with ICE through a closed window. And it's working. You can hear ICE speaking back, with the audio in the car that's being recorded, but ICE just immediately escalates the situation and smashes the window. So by and large, my advice is that you do crack open that window just a little bit. We're talking like an inch or two so that you can communicate with ICE. Now, your original question is, what should you do if you're pulled over? So I do think that you should, crack open that window. I think that you should, first of all, of course, pull over in a safe way, right? To pull over to a safe area. And I would probably keep my hands on the steering wheel as well. I think we all understand the risks of driving while brown or black, that police might have unfair associations or make unfair assumptions about those types of drivers. But once you've pulled over and once they're approaching your vehicle, there's only three things that I would have ready for them. And that is your driver's license, your car insurance, and your car registration. Now, apart from that, if you're the driver, I would not answer any other questions. If they start to ask you questions about where are you from, are you a citizen, I would exercise your right to remain silent. Now, it's slightly different if you are a passenger. So as I said, if you're a driver, you can hand over, or you should hand over your driver's license and possibly your proof of insurance and registration. But if you're a passenger in that car, I would absolutely just exercise my right to remain silent. I would not show them any ID, even if they ask for it. At most, I would tell them that I would like to speak to a lawyer before answering your questions. There are also a few things that you probably should not do. You should not show them any false documentation. You should not lie. And of course, you shouldn't try to run away or try to, flee that situation.
What if somebody comes to your door? What if an ICE official comes knocking? What are your rights there?
Yeah, if you're at your home, and this again goes to something that you mentioned earlier, which is, the Constitution protects everyone. It protects both citizens and non-citizens alike. And one of the great protections we have is in the Fourth Amendment, right? Security in our home. And so if ICE comes knocking at your door, my broad advice is just don't answer the door. Just don't answer the door. It is unlikely that ICE has a proper judicial warrant that will allow them to enter your home, because your home is a private space that is very well protected by the Constitution. And unless they have a judicial warrant, they can't just come into your home. And there's only one other way that they could come into your home, and that's through your own permission that you give to them. So if you, for example, open the door just a crack to try to speak with them a little bit, they might construe this as you granting them permission to come in, which is why I generally say just don't answer the door at all, because that way you're not at risk of giving them permission or doing any actions that would construe permission to enter your home.
What about bystanders? If somebody is not involved but witnesses an ICE arrest or witnesses something that they feel is a miscarriage of the law, of course, we all have our phones out all the time. We're taking video. Is there some type of action a bystander can do that would help, that they have the legal right to do?
Absolutely. Bystanders can play a huge role in this right now. The first thing I would say is they would have to use their judgment, right? You have to think about assessing not only your own safety in that moment, but also how your actions might create risks to that community member who's being arrested, right? You don't want to escalate that situation and make it even worse. So you have to exercise some judgment about how close you're going to be, how loud you're going to be, and what actions you're taking. But It is very common now for everyone to carry their cell phones with them, of course. And so it is a natural reaction to record what's happening. I would still suggest that you announce aloud that you are recording before you do so. And I would also add one more caveat that, I don't think that you should be live streaming this. There are some privacy concerns. A lot of immigrants that come here, they might be fleeing persecution, and so have some really serious concerns about their names or their face, being publicized out there. And then the other situation, though, if you do recognize that, you know what, this is a really hot situation, remember that taking notes in that moment is also very useful. And if you don't have a pad and paper or pen at that moment, take notes immediately after. Because ultimately, this evidence is really helpful for people like me, with lawyers, where we can show that the arrest was done unlawfully, that it broke their own regulations or violated the Constitution. And if we have video evidence, of course, that's great. But also if we have what's called contemporaneous notes, so notes that were taken at that time or very soon after, that's also very good evidence that we can use in court.
I have to say, Henry, I have been thinking a lot about this since witnessing the video of Rumesa Ozturk, the grad student who was grabbed at Tufts by mostly plainclothes officers. Many had masks on. There are bystanders watching this go down on the video that you can hear saying, "Who are you? What is going on?" Is there a situation in which having video or having these kind of notes could make a difference later on in the outcomes for somebody?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it could. I mean, for the reasons that I mentioned before, which is that in many instances, I mean, you asked about the home and the car in different areas. ICE is always like sort of, I think, trying to push the boundaries of what's proper and what's not. And so to the extent that you can record these or have evidence of the actions that they're taking, lawyers certainly can use that to show in court how they're sort of violating their own regulations, their own policies, but also the constitutional policies. And that in turn can hold ICE accountable. There has been very successful litigation about warrantless arrests and the steps that ICE now needs to take to show that, in fact, they had probable cause, that they weren't just racial profiling when they were arresting somebody. So that is helpful, of course, for my colleagues and myself in the legal world. But also it's helpful, I think, because by virtue of it being publicized, by people knowing about this, they will start, I hope, contacting their legislators, contacting people to say this seems really inappropriate. And there's also other pressure points that are not within the legal realm that I think are equally, if not even more helpful in these situations. So you might feel like you're a little bit helpless, that you're actually not doing all that much. But in fact, you are. I mean, so long as you continue to be involved and continue to document and to take action where you are seeing some sort of injustice being done, that is absolutely helpful.
Some people might hear this and think, Henry, you are advocating breaking the law or not cooperating with a member of law enforcement. You're advocating escalating the situation. What's your response to that?
I think exercising your constitutional rights is never a wrong thing. I mean, you are absolutely empowered, both you as a citizen, or if you are a non-citizen, you have constitutional rights. And it's really important for us to invoke these rights in the face of what we're encountering right now. Because what we're seeing is the government is clearly trying to create this atmosphere of sort of fear and chaos. And to the extent that they can succeed in that, that means they won't care if they're trampling over people's constitutional rights. It'll embolden them to do even perhaps worse things, right? And so to the extent that we can document this, that we can invoke our rights and we can, frankly, stand up to what's happening, that's the only way we can counter this situation in my mind.
We've been talking with Henry Wong, one of the directing attorneys for the Northwest Immigrant Rights Project, about regional ICE enforcement and knowing your rights when you encounter ICE or some kind of immigration official as a bystander or as somebody who is on a visa, on a green card, undocumented. Anything else you want to add here, Henry? I think that there is so much fluid in this space. One, because much of this is going up to the Supreme Court, whether or not the Alien Enemies Act can be invoked to speed these deportations. There is conversation about, among Stephen Miller and other presidential aides about suspending habeas corpus in some instance, which is the right to challenge your detention in court. Anything else that you want to add just as final thoughts here as you are trying to advise your clients, trying to let people know their rights and how to hold on to those even at a time when they're being challenged in many ways?
What I would like listeners to know is that, I mean, it sounds cliche, but it really makes a difference if you become involved. I think that your listeners are probably, really well informed about events that are happening. And I just hope that people just take that next step, right? That next step of either learning a little bit more, contacting their local representative, or thinking about even gathering with their own community members to see how they can support, this community that's really being vilified right now. A lot of the really important things that have been important protections that have happened because of people organizing. I think of DACA, right? The Dreamers. During the Obama campaign, Obama was the deporter in chief, right? And for a long time, he would ignore a large segment of the population, these protesters that would come to his speeches, and they just did not give up. They continued to organize, they continued to take action. And at one point, it reached the point where their voices had to be heard, where they were taking the right steps by taking action, and they were garnering support broadly as well. And suddenly you had this really important changes to our immigration system where we just protected a large segment of the population. But this was not done, I don't think, in my mind, by lawyers or by politicians. It was really done by the people. And so what we're seeing right now happening, I think, our best defense right now is more people to understand what's happening and to take action against it.
Henry Huang with Northwest Immigrant Rights Project. Thank you.
Thanks, Libby.
Thanks for listening to Soundside. This show is only possible because listeners support us. If you're able to give right now, please check out the show notes for a link to donate. And don't forget, you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 FM Seattle at noon and 8 p.m., Monday through Thursday, or anytime online at KUOW.org.